After tomorrow, you're no longer part of this family. Those were the exact words my son's fiancée whispered to me the night before their wedding. Her voice was calm, almost tender, but the venom beneath it made my stomach twist. I remember standing there, clutching the gift I'd made for them, a scrapbook filled with moments that defined my son's life, and feeling my world tilt off its axis. That evening had started with joy. I had stopped by the rehearsal dinner, hoping to hand Daniel the scrapbook in person. Each page told a story. His first day of school, his acceptance letter to law school, the graduation photo where he beamed with pride. It wasn't just paper and glue. It was proof of every sacrifice I'd ever made. Jessica met me at the door. She looked flawless, hair in place, diamond earrings glinting in the warm light, but her smile never reached her eyes. I offered her the scrapbook, explaining that I wanted them to look through it together that night. She didn't even look at it. Instead, she leaned closer, her perfume sharp and suffocating. "You've done your job," she whispered. "You raised Daniel. Now it's my turn. Don't embarrass yourself tomorrow by clinging to him. He's my family now, not yours." For a moment I couldn't move. My throat tightened, my hands shook. Years of exhaustion, double shifts, lonely nights, raising a child without a husband, pressed down on me all at once. And now, the woman who claimed to love my son was erasing me from his life like I was an old photograph that didn't fit her frame. I should have said something, should have defended myself. But instead, I just stood there, feeling the weight of every silent sacrifice I'd made for my boy. She patted my arm gently, as if comforting a child. "Go home, Mrs. Turner," she said with that icy smile. "Sleep in tomorrow. The day will be perfect without you." I left without remembering how I got home. That night I sat on the edge of my bed, the scrapbook trembling in my lap, every page blurred behind tears. Each photo, each note a reminder of the years I'd given up everything for Daniel. And now I was supposed to disappear quietly. But as the night deepened, so did something else inside me. Not sadness this time, but resolve. If she didn't want me there tomorrow, fine. I wouldn't go. But what happened at that wedding would prove that some secrets can't stay buried. Not even under a veil. Rehook. By noon the next day, the entire city would know why the wedding never happened, and why everyone was looking at me. To anyone looking in from the outside, I was the proud mother of a successful young man about to begin his own family. But inside, I carried a quiet ache, one that only a single mother could understand. When Daniel's father left, our world shrank overnight. Daniel was only 7, clutching a stuffed dinosaur and asking when his dad would come home. I never found an answer that didn't break my heart. So I made a silent promise that my son would never feel the emptiness his father left behind. I worked every shift I could take, sometimes coming home so tired I'd fall asleep sitting up. Still, every time Daniel came home with a report card covered in A's or handed me a crooked Mother's Day card, I knew it was worth it. He grew up kind, humble, the kind of man who made me believe I had done something right. And then came Jessica. From the start, she seemed perfect, polished, confident, the kind of woman who always had the right words for everyone. Daniel was smitten. I wanted to be too. But even in our first meeting, I felt something off. She was polite enough in front of him, but when he stepped away, her tone sharpened. She asked nothing about me or Daniel's childhood. Instead, she talked about herself, her job, her ambitions, her dreams of a life that matters. When I tried to share a story about Daniel's school days, she smiled politely and said, "That's sweet," before changing the topic. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. But small moments began to build a bigger truth. On Daniel's last birthday, I baked his favorite cake, a tradition since he was 10. When I brought it out, she laughed softly and said, "Oh, he doesn't eat things like that anymore. I'll make sure he sticks to his new diet." She took the knife from my hand like she was doing me a favor. Daniel smiled awkwardly, trying to smooth things over. "Thanks, Mom. You didn't have to." But I saw the guilt in his eyes. It hurt, but I let it go. That's what mothers do, isn't it? We swallow the pain for the sake of peace. As the wedding drew closer, I found myself more and more on the outside. She planned everything, the flowers, the colors, the seating, without a single question for me. I told myself it didn't matter. As long as my son was happy, that was enough. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. And by the time the wedding morning came, I discovered just how right that instinct was. Rehook. Because sometimes the moment you choose to stay silent is the very moment everything begins to unravel. The morning of the wedding came quietly, too quietly. I woke before sunrise, the sky still heavy with gray light. Out of habit, I boiled water for coffee, laid out the soft blue dress Daniel once said looked beautiful on me, and waited for the feeling of pride to replace the ache in my chest. But Jessica's words from the night before haunted every breath I took. After tomorrow, you're no longer part of this family. I sat at the kitchen table, staring into my mug, wondering when exactly I had become disposable. For 27 years, every part of my life had revolved around my son. His school lunches, his homework, his dreams. And now, all of it was supposed to vanish behind wedding vows I wasn't even invited to witness. So I made my choice. I wouldn't go. My phone buzzed again and again. Texts from relatives, missed calls from Daniel, even messages from my sister asking where I was. I ignored them all. Every time I looked at the clock, guilt crept higher, but I told myself this was for the best. I wasn't wanted there, and I refused to humiliate myself by pretending otherwise. By mid-morning, my sister arrived in a panic, still wearing her bridesmaid's dress. "Margaret, what are you doing?" she demanded, barging through the door. "I'm not going," I said simply. Her face drained of color. "You can't mean that. He's your only son. He's marrying someone who told me to my face that I don't belong," I whispered. "Why should I sit there like a stranger at my own son's wedding?" She didn't know what to say. The silence between us felt heavier than any argument could. Finally, she sighed and left, muttering that people would never forgive me for this. At 11 o'clock, I heard the church bells through the open window. I closed my eyes, thinking about Daniel standing at the altar, waiting for a future I feared would break him. But fate had its own plans. Just after noon, my phone rang again. This time my sister's trembling voice on the other end. "Margaret," she breathed. "The wedding's off." I froze. "What do you mean off?" "It's chaos," she said, barely holding it together. "Daniel found out the truth. About Jessica." My heart stopped. What truth? Her next words came out in a shaky whisper that changed everything. "Rehook. He saw the photos, Margaret," she said. "2 weeks ago, with another man." It arrived on a quiet Sunday morning. I was sipping coffee on the porch when my phone buzzed with a single email notification. The sender's name made my heart lurch. From Jessica Hayes, subject: "You don't know everything." For a long moment I just stared at the screen, the sunlight turning the words into faint ghosts. I'd almost convinced myself she was gone for good. Just another cautionary tale whispered about at dinner tables. But there she was again, reaching out from the shadows. I opened the message. "I know you think you won, Margaret. But someday you'll realize not everything was as it seemed. There are things about Daniel you never knew. Things that would change how you see him. Maybe I was wrong, but I wasn't the only one lying." No signature. No explanation. Just those words. Heavy and deliberate. My first instinct was anger. How dare she reach out after everything she'd done? How dare she twist the knife when we'd finally started to heal? But underneath the fury was something else. Fear. Not of Jessica, but of the possibility that she wasn't entirely lying. I didn't tell Daniel. Not at first. He was doing so well, building a name for himself, smiling again, finally free from the wreckage she'd left behind. I couldn't drag him back into her games. Days passed. Then weeks. The message haunted me, replaying in my mind during sleepless nights. Things about Daniel you never knew. One evening, curiosity won. I replied with a single line. "If you have something to say, say it." She never responded. But 2 days later, a thick envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address. Inside were a few papers, a photo, and a note in the same slanted handwriting. The photo was of Daniel, much younger, maybe 15, standing beside a man I didn't recognize. The man's hand rested on Daniel's shoulder, and the smile on my son's face looked uneasy. The note read, "Ask him who this is." My pulse thundered. The handwriting was definitely hers. I sat there for what felt like hours, the edges of the photo trembling in my hand. Part of me wanted to throw it into the fire and never look back. But another part, the part that had survived betrayal, gossip, and loss, knew I couldn't ignore it. The truth had saved me once before. But what if this truth could destroy us both? Re-hook, final hook, and as I stared at that picture, one question echoed louder than all the rest. What secret could my son still be hiding? Sleep became impossible after that. The photograph sat on my kitchen counter like a ticking clock, daring me to look at it again. Every time I passed it, my chest tightened. The man's face was unfamiliar, mid-40s, confident smile, sharp eyes, but something about him made my stomach turn. Daniel looked younger in the picture. Awkward, uneasy, his smile stretched too tight. By morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I slipped the photo into my bag and drove across town to Daniel's apartment. He opened the door, still in his work clothes, surprise flickering across his face. "Mom? You okay? Can we talk?" I asked quietly. We sat at his kitchen table, the same one where I'd left him the scrapbook weeks before. My hand shook as I slid the photo across the table. He froze. His jaw tightened the moment his eyes met the image. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice low. "It came in the mail. From her." His face went pale. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he exhaled and looked away, guilt shadowing his features. "I should have told you," he murmured. My heart pounded. "Told me what, Daniel?" He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes darting toward the window. "That man, his name's Robert Kane. He was Dad's business partner. The reason Dad left." The air in the room thickened. "What do you mean?" Daniel swallowed hard. "Dad didn't just walk out on us. He was forced out. Robert ran an investment firm. They got caught up in something illegal. Fraud, laundering, I'm not even sure how deep it went. Dad took the blame to protect someone, maybe Robert, maybe someone higher. When it all collapsed, he disappeared before anyone could arrest him." I stared at my son, the words barely sinking in. "How do you know all this?" That night I barely slept. The name Robert Kane repeated in my head like a whisper I couldn't silence. For 27 years, I had lived with one version of the truth, that my husband had abandoned us without a word. Now the thought that he might have been protecting us instead tore through me like a storm. By morning I'd made up my mind. I needed to know who Robert Kane really was, and what he'd done to my family. The next day, I visited the public records office downtown. The clerk, a young man with tired eyes, helped me search the archives. When I mentioned Kane's name, his brows lifted slightly. "That's an old one," he said. "He was under investigation years ago. Financial crimes, if I remember right." He typed a few lines into his computer, and within moments a list appeared. Kane and Weller Investments. Bankrupt. Closed 28 years ago. Multiple lawsuits. One criminal case that had mysteriously vanished mid-trial. "Do you have any files from the case?" I asked. He hesitated. "Most of it's sealed, ma'am. But there's one thing I can show you." He printed a page, a list of names. There it was, in black ink, Robert Kane, and just beneath it Thomas Turner, my husband. I stared at it, my pulse thudding in my ears. My husband hadn't just worked for Kane. He'd been involved. That night I sat alone in my living room, the page trembling in my hands. Daniel had texted me, asking if I was okay. I didn't reply, because how could I tell him that the father he barely remembered might have been part of something criminal? But something about the story didn't add up. If Thomas had been guilty, why had Kane been the one who walked free? And if my husband had taken the blame, who was he protecting? I decided to dig deeper. The next morning, I called an old friend from my hospital days, Karen, whose sister worked at a local paper. Within hours, she emailed me a newspaper clipping from decades ago. Local investor Thomas Turner missing after fraud inquiry. The photo beneath the headline made my throat tighten. It was him, my husband, looking older, haunted like a man who'd already lost everything. And standing just behind him in the crowd, half hidden by a reporter's shoulder, was Robert Kane. Smiling. Something inside me froze. That smile wasn't friendly. It was triumphant. Re-hook. And that was when I realized, my husband hadn't vanished to escape justice. He'd vanished because someone made sure he couldn't tell the truth. "I found out in law school," he said quietly. "Robert reached out to me. Said he owed me an explanation. I met him once, that's when the photo was taken. But he told me not to tell you. He said the less you knew, the safer you'd be." I sank back, trembling. All these years I'd built a life around the story that my husband had abandoned us. But what if he hadn't? Maybe Jessica hadn't been taunting me. Maybe she just pulled the wrong thread. And now the whole fabric of our past was unraveling. Rehook. Because if Robert Kane was alive, then my husband's secret hadn't gone to the grave after all. After finding that old newspaper clipping, something inside me snapped. For years I had lived quietly, convincing myself that peace was the same as closure. But staring at Robert Kane's smile in that grainy photograph, I realized I hadn't found peace at all. I'd just been living inside someone else's lie. I spent the next few days chasing ghosts. Every record I found on Kane led to another dead end. Companies dissolved, addresses abandoned, associates who had either moved away or refused to talk. It was like trying to hold smoke. Still, I kept digging, each new discovery unraveling a little more of the story. Then one afternoon, while scrolling through old business articles online, a headline froze me cold. Kane Financial Group relaunches under new management, Jessica Hayes named Director of Client Relations. Jessica. My breath caught. There she was, smiling confidently beside Robert Kane in a glossy corporate photo. My son's ex-fiancée. The same woman who'd ruined his wedding, now standing shoulder to shoulder with the man connected to my husband's disappearance. It didn't make sense at first, but the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Jessica hadn't just been ambitious, she'd been strategic. She'd chosen Daniel because of who he was, because of his name. And Kane? He had trained her. Maybe even sent her. But why? I printed the article and drove straight to Daniel's office. He looked up as I burst through the door, startled by my urgency. Mom, what's going on? I dropped the paper on his desk. Look who she's working with. His eyes scanned the photo, widening in disbelief. That can't be. It is, I said. She's tied to Kane. And Kane was tied to your father. This isn't coincidence, Daniel. It never was. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. You think she knew? That the wedding was what? A setup? I don't know yet, I admitted. But Kane's company fell apart around the same time your father disappeared. And now Jessica's helping him rebuild. Doesn't that feel like more than bad luck? He didn't answer. His face had gone pale again, the same color it turned on the day of the wedding. I reached across the table, my hand trembling slightly. You said once that you wanted to protect people who can't protect themselves. Maybe this is your chance to protect your father's name. He looked at me, resolve slowly replacing shock. Then we start digging, Mom. Together. And just like that, the circle began to close, the past, the betrayal, the lies. All of it leading back to one man. Rehook. But before we could find Robert Kane, someone else found us first. Daniel wasn't the kind of man to believe in coincidences anymore. Not after Jessica. Not after everything. So when we started digging into Robert Kane's new company, he approached it like a case, meticulous, cautious, prepared for anything. I, on the other hand, was fueled by something else. Years of silence that had finally found its voice. We began by tracing Kane's new firm through public filings. Everything looked clean on the surface, new name, new investors, shiny website. But buried deep in the paperwork were familiar fingerprints. Shell companies registered under aliases I recognized from the old Kane and Weller records. Same structure, Daniel muttered, scrolling through the files. Different names, but the money trail's identical. He's rebuilding the same empire, just laundering it through new faces. And Jessica's one of those faces, I said quietly. He nodded grimly. She's his recruiter. Every client she brings in, every deal she manages, it funnels back to him. It's the same scam in a prettier suit. For a while, the pieces fit together almost too neatly. But then strange things began happening. One morning, I came outside to find my mailbox pried open, and a week later, Daniel noticed a dark sedan parked across from his apartment. The same car showing up on different days at different hours. And then there were the phone calls, static on the line, no one speaking. At first, I brushed it off as paranoia. But Daniel's instincts told him otherwise. Mom, he said one night, voice low. Someone's keeping tabs on us. Kane's too careful to let us dig around without noticing. I wanted to believe we were safe, but deep down I knew better. People like Robert Kane didn't just protect secrets, they buried them. The final proof came 2 nights later. I was coming home from the grocery store when I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. They followed every turn I made, every stoplight. I slowed down, took a detour through side streets. The car slowed too. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it over the hum of the engine. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the car idled at the corner for a moment before disappearing down the road. I called Daniel immediately. "They're watching," I whispered. His voice on the other end was tight, controlled. "Then we're getting close." I glanced at the photo of my husband on the mantel, the man I thought I'd lost forever. "Close to what?" I asked softly. "To the reason Dad vanished," Daniel said. "And maybe to the people who made it happen." Rehook. But the next morning, a package on my doorstep proved that someone else already knew exactly what we were about to find. The package was small, wrapped in plain brown paper, no return address, no markings. It waited on my doorstep like a ghost. I hesitated before picking it up, my fingers trembling as though the cardboard might burn me. Inside was a single envelope and a flash drive. On the envelope, in handwriting I hadn't seen in nearly 3 decades, were 3 words that stopped my breath cold. For Margaret and Daniel. I sank onto the porch steps, staring at the letters. My husband's handwriting. Couldn't be, but it was. I'd memorized every curve of it back when love was simple and life hadn't yet broken us. Daniel arrived 10 minutes later, his face pale with worry after I'd called him. Together we opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded sheet. If you're reading this, it means Kane finally slipped up. I couldn't come back, not after what I knew. They would have used you both to silence me. I made mistakes, Margaret, but leaving you was never one of them. It was the only way to keep you safe. I'm sorry you had to raise him alone. Tell our son the truth. I loved you both more than my own freedom. I pressed my hand over my mouth, tears spilling freely. Daniel's jaw clenched as he picked up the flash drive and plugged it into his laptop. On the screen appeared folders, documents, bank records, transaction logs, proof of everything. Kane's illegal transfers, false partnerships, offshore accounts. Evidence that could destroy him completely. "This is it," Daniel whispered. "This is what Dad died for." Among the files was one final video, old, grainy, dated 27 years ago. My husband sat in front of the camera, eyes heavy but calm. "If they find this, it means I'm gone. But maybe one day you'll understand. Kane isn't just a thief, he's dangerous. He's using marriages, families, everything to cover his empire. Protect Daniel. Protect yourself. And when it's safe, tell the truth." When the video ended, Daniel closed the laptop and sat in silence. The truth had cost us a lifetime, but it was finally ours. Within a month, Daniel took the files to the authorities. Investigations reopened. Headlines shifted. Kane Financial Group under federal review. This time there would be no escape. The night the warrant went public, I stood on the porch again, looking at the stars. The air felt lighter.